that people fear what they don't understand.
Yes.
So when we're talking about empathy, a lot of times because people can't relate to the situation that they're going through, they fear it and they don't want to understand. And with most people, especially when they're trying to get away from something, they use their escape coping mechanism. So they try to escape from even wanting to understand. So they just avoid it. So in essence, when you have educators who don't understand the plight that some people have to walk through in this world, they fear it, they don't want to understand it, so they avoid it and they avoid the conversation. So when it's brought to that classroom, now what happens is that they don't want to even engage because they don't even know how to.
It's the Empowerment Perspective Podcast, hosted by Demiso Josie and Mr. Kareem Spence. Stay empowered. Stay empowered. All right, welcome to yet another episode of the Empowerment Perspective Podcast. I go by the name of Dr. Demiso A. Josie alongside Mr. Petty, Kareem Spence. How are you doing, sir?
Oh, wow, man.
You sure? You sure you're doing well? You don't have
I'm doing good. I can't put my beard off. I'm doing good.
Got you. Got rid of that COVID cut finally. I understand.
We coming out of COVID.
Also, we're joined by Jamie. How are you doing, Jamie?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm maintaining everything good with you and COVID and teaching and all that stuff. And I think your kids are back now. Both of you guys, your kids are back full. For you guys, full time, or are you now half time, right? Like half days.
5 half days.
5 half days. That's
Yes.
tough. All right. Well, you guys are adjusting. It's good to see you all. It's been a minute. We are in the end of our season 6 of our Empowerment Perspective podcast. So the way I want to go about this right now is just a general overview of season 6 of what your impression was. We had some pretty interesting guests on in season 6. So Moody Black was probably one of my favorite ones. Stand Tall Steve was another good one.
Moody Black was definitely one of my favorite shows. It was funny. It wasn't what I was expecting it to be, but we had some good guests. Some of your former students came on. We had the young man that did the sports for us. He was really fun to have on, and I think that it was good for us to continue to do this, especially through COVID, through the pandemic. It gave our listeners something to listen to. It gave me something to look forward to doing, and coming together. And
got you. For those of you who didn't see the Moody Black episode, that was a really powerful one because he was talking about mental health and how to deal with mental health. And he was doing it from a perspective of through his poetry and his art and how he was able to deal with that. So make sure you definitely check that one out for sure. My man Carson out there in Chicago, like we said here in Empowerment Perspective, we're about giving kids their voice as well. He was 10 years old and he was our sports analyst during the Super Bowl. So he did a great job for us in season 6 with that. I know that, we had some former students on, which is good. Again, dealing with anxiety and things of that nature and how they overcome their anxiety. So Moody Black probably was one of my favorite ones. Stand Tall Steve was awesome as well. Another educator out here in New Jersey that is actually in the business of motivational speaking and consulting. So he's definitely got some good information with that as well. I did also enjoy, we had we talked about how to succeed as a Black male. We had 3 powerful Black businessmen that were on. So shout out to Kyle Santillian out there in Chicago, Randy Washington in Pennsylvania, and in the Business Bully, wherever he is in the world, he was on as well. So those were some of my favorites. So
I'll say this is one thing that has been consistent in season 6. Season 6 was definitely an interesting year that I'm hoping that season 7 is nothing like. We deal with issues as far as George Floyd and all the emotions that went on there from us being able to participate in some of the marches for civil rights, from us linking up with some of your friends and just having that moment of, I want to say, inner peace to be able to bring about and a platform where people can actually share.
absolutely.
To dealing with a pandemic and losing so many friends and family members. It was a rough year, and even trying to put on a good face for the students and make it seem like everything is going to be okay, when we know deep inside that everything wasn't okay. So we went from opening up the school to closing down the school to opening up the school. So it was a tough year, but I'm hoping that season 7 is nothing like 6, and I'm looking forward to being able to put this way beyond us and being able to move.
It's a great point. For those who do follow Empowerment Perspective Group, we're not just all about podcasts. We're not all just about consultants. So what we were able to do was bring a bunch of Black males together and had an open space for us to be able to communicate about some of the things that was going on in our communities and around the world. And it was a very emotional time for these men to be able to express themselves. It was a good space. People cried. We supported each other. We still support each other. So it was definitely something that was it was needed. And we had people across the country that was on that particular cause. On the flip side, though, Jamie, you also had a group that you also met with during that time. Care to share a little bit some of the things that you were doing with them?
So I ran kind of like a women's group where we also talked about what we're lacking in regards to what we're bringing to the classroom and teaching our students. And it was just interesting to bring together so many different peoples from so many different backgrounds and hearing, everyone's scared, regardless of what your culture or what your background or what your history is. No one knows how to address it in the classroom. No one knows what the next step is. So it was interesting for us to come together as a group and kind of brainstorm and bounce ideas off of one another and come up with ideas that hopefully we'll be able to get to once we come into a regular school year.
Got you. And this is a perfect segue to introduce our guest today. As always, I'm on LinkedIn, scouring LinkedIn, looking for interesting people to have conversations with. And in the light of the recent George Floyd verdict, I thought this topic today that we're going to talk about is really, really important. Although we dealt with it a lot during season 6, I think this episode we get to dive in a little bit more into that topic specifically about the racial divide that exists in this country and how we can mend those things within the educational in educational space as well as in everyday space as well. But so I was looking through LinkedIn as I always do, and I came across an author. I actually picked up her book. I didn't finish it yet, but her book, Radical Empathy, Find a Pathway to Bridging Racial Divides. I started looking through there and I said, we have to have this lady on this podcast so we can dive in here and hopefully on the back end, we can come up with some tips for these educators on how to be able to have conversations with students that may not look like them, for example. And you may not understand, some of their pain and emotions that they're going through. So Terry Givens, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, and thanks for inviting me. Already just from what I've heard, I'm really interested in hearing more about what you guys have been doing.
Awesome. So let's dive in. You have a book that you published, and I didn't read most of it and have enough time to finish it. But this is probably the first podcast ever that I actually took notes, because everything else is off the top of the head. So I have my notes, a little bit of notes prepared, and I'll probably go off script. But let's talk about Radical Empathy. Why did you decide to write this particular book right now?
So let me give you, because I know the people on the podcast probably haven't read my background, but I'm a professor of political science. I'm a first-generation college goer. My father was military, and I grew up in a place called Spokane, Washington, which unfortunately is infamous for people like Rachel Dolezal and all that, but I didn't know her or anything. So I grew up in Spokane, and I always wondered, why did my parents have us grow up in Spokane? So for those who don't know, Spokane is when I was growing up, especially in the 60s and 70s, it was less than 1% Black. And we didn't spend a lot of time with relatives. And then, I feel like I struggled with understanding, why my parents made some of the choices they did. And so I started thinking about it. And, actually, I was really inspired by other books like Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns. I started doing family genealogy. I visited where my mom grew up in Opelousas, Louisiana. I visited some of the civil rights sites around the country, kind of as in preparation for I knew I wanted to write something, but I needed this background understanding. And part of it was just, I talk about 6 steps to radical empathy. And the first step is willingness to be vulnerable. And so I had to be vulnerable and ask myself, what impact did all of this have on me? And I realized that, wait a second, I grew up in a world of cultural, kind of being cut off from my culture to a certain extent. I later reached out to it, but that it was a world of structural racism that I was living in. And I talk about the sea of white supremacy, and we all live, it's like, the bells and whistles went off in my head, and I was just like, wait a second, we're all struggling with this. It's not just that white people are discriminating against Black people. My own parents were, didn't want us to interact with other Black people because they wanted us to be assimilated and, speak a certain way. We always had to dress it's Black respectability, right? And so I grew up in that world that saw white as the norm, and not, being, even though, I grew up in the era of Black power and all that, my parents weren't out marching in the civil rights movement. They were doing their own thing, right? They were trying to survive. I don't want to put my parents down at all. They were doing exactly what they thought was going to help us be successful. And to a certain extent, they were right. But there was this cultural loss I felt. I felt like I still am trying to, I feel like I'm trying to recapture some of that, the connections to family. And that's why I do so much work to understand our family history and so on. So this book, to a certain extent, was to help me walk through this path to radical empathy, not just for other people, but for myself and for my parents. I had to develop radical empathy for my parents, which meant, so I talk about the 6 steps, but the most important thing is taking action. And so the action I took was to understand the history, the culture, the issues that my parents, what would I have done living, doing, with the kind of background my parents had. And I don't want to be angry or blame them. I want to understand. So that was a lot of it.
Got you. So let's just talk about the word empathy in itself, because I think a lot of people confuse empathy with sympathy. So can you just break down what you mean by radical empathy and empathy in general?
Yeah, see, the problem is a lot of people think, oh, I have empathy, I feel for other people. That's not enough. So, empathy, and I talk a lot about the definitions of it. There's kind of this cognitive empathy where, you kind of understand, okay, this person is dealing with bias and so on, but there's really kind of more an emotional empathy where you actually can try to understand somebody's feelings. And because I see, people like, oh, why do we have to worry about microaggressions? It's like, well, those are, if you put yourself in my shoes and understand the pain that those things cause me, then you will have a much better understanding of why I care about, quote unquote, microaggressions. I don't particularly like that term, but, and so radical empathy, though, is saying, not only am I going to understand why you're experiencing pain or bias or whatever, I'm going to do something about it. And that's what really struck me is, you look at some of this work out there, even this whole idea of, white fragility. It's like, okay, fine, you understand the racism is out there, but what are you doing about it? I live in a community where there's, I'm very lucky. I tend to choose where I live based on where I work, right? And where I work was this college right down the road. And, this happens to be, it's a beautiful neighborhood, and it's, there's people from different backgrounds, but there's me and one other Black family, down the road, who, of course, the woman's my best friend because we saw each other down this. It's like, I love telling this story because we moved into our house, like 5 years ago, and walking down the street, I see a Black woman walking her dog, and I'm like, hello, let's be friends. Luckily, we had boys who were the same age, and so we're good friends. But I look at my neighborhood and I say, okay, you guys got your Black Lives Matter flags and your signs that say, we believe in Black Lives Matter and all this stuff. What are you doing? What? And actually, a lot of them want to know. I mean, how many of us have been asked, oh, what can I do?
Right.
And so that was the other side of it is radical empathy is not just about trying to understand how I feel. It's doing something about it. It's saying, yes, I understand that we have to create change and we all have to work to dismantle structural racism. And it starts from the inside.
I think one of the key words that you used there was all, and because I could ask the same question to to the Black culture as well. Like, yes, we marched, yes, we our voices were heard and things like, but what are you doing about it? And when I do get a chance to go out and speak to these young people, I said, you have to be a part of the change agent. I need you in the game. I need you in the political spaces. I need you to be in educational spaces. If you want to see changes, you got to be a part of the change. It's great. Yes, I went out there, I marched, I did all those things too. But like you said, what are you doing about it going forward? Kareem and Jamie, I want to bring you into this discussion, talking about empathy and how important it is for educators to be empathetic to their students, given the context of the racial climate and things that are going on in this nature. So Kareem, I'll start with you in terms of your impressions of what empathy means from your perspective as a guidance counselor.
Okay, so before I get there, as the professor was speaking, I only thing that came to my mind was a quote that Nas said in one of his rhymes, was that people fear what they don't understand. So
Yes.
when we're talking about empathy, a lot of times because people can't relate to the situation that they're going through, they fear it and they don't want to understand. And with most people, especially when they're trying to get away from something, they use their escape coping mechanism. So they try to escape from even wanting to understand. So they just avoid it. So in essence, when you have educators who don't understand the plight that some people have to walk through in this world, they fear it, they don't want to understand it, so they avoid it and they avoid the conversation. So when it's brought to their classroom, now what happens is that they don't want to even engage because they don't even know how to.
Makes sense to me. Do you think that educators are overthinking how they could be empathetic to their students? And I'm saying this because, I've said this in previous podcasts too, we all can relate to feelings at the end of the day. Now, I may not understand you completely and your experience, but I know what it feels like to be afraid. I know what it feels like to be angry. I know what it feels like, all these things. Can educators relate to their students on that basic level? Not saying that you're going to understand, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that's behind that. But are there?
No, they can't. And part of that, not I mean to cut you off, but part of that is because education has become politicized. So it became a platform for politicians. So when teachers walk in a classroom, they can't even be human anymore. They can't even think about having this word called feelings, because the minute that they do, not only do they get slapped on the hand, but they actually lose their teaching certificate. So now they don't even have employment anymore, and they just get thrown and tossed to the side because they actually are doing something that we all want people to do, which is to be human.
Now, Jamie, inside the classroom, how can we become empathetic educators? Like, what's your perspective on this?
Was that people fear what they don't understand.
Yes.
So when we're talking about empathy, a lot of times because people can't relate to the situation that they're going through, they fear it and they don't want to understand. And with most people, especially when they're trying to get away from something, they use their escape coping mechanism. So they try to escape from even wanting to understand. So they just avoid it. So in essence, when you have educators who don't understand the plight that some people have to walk through in this world, they fear it, they don't want to understand it, so they avoid it and they avoid the conversation. So when it's brought to their classroom, now what happens is that they don't want to even engage because they don't even know how to.
Actually, I think in the classroom, empathy is nothing more than perspective. It's understanding your students' perspectives and understanding their backgrounds before you can do anything else. And that just goes across the board. How can I expect you to listen to me and learn from me if I don't understand you as a human being and understand your perspective as well? So perspective in the classroom is what empathy is. It's knowing that everyone that's in that room has a backstory, has some sort of history that they're bringing to the classroom. And it's your job as a teacher to understand that and to recognize that before you can move forward.
Got you. Perspective is a big thing as an educator. I mean, at the end of the day, when we're teaching, we're supposed to be giving multiple perspectives of whatever topic so that, the kids can see it from all different angles. It doesn't happen majority of the time. I do understand that. But I think in order to progress as a good educator, especially when we're dealing with, race and culture and things of that nature, is to be able to have multiple perspectives. But that involves you stepping outside of your comfort zone, admitting to your biases and your shortcomings and all that stuff too. So there is you have to be brave to be a great educator at the end of the day, and be willing to make those those adjustments and take those steps. Now, Terry, I want to get back to you because one of the things that you actually touched on a little bit earlier that I read in the book, you talked about this concept called imposter syndrome. Can you explain a little bit about what that is and how you dealt with it? Because I have similar, I guess I have a understanding of it from a different perspective, but I'll let you explain the imposter syndrome.
Well, I'd been reading about this and actually feeling what I thought was imposter syndrome, which is especially being a first generation college goer, you get to a place like Stanford, which is where I went undergrad, and you just feel like you don't fit in. And maybe, and people will feed into that by, oh, you got in because of affirmative action, or you got in. And, I knew that wasn't right. I mean, I had a stellar record, et cetera, but you still get that, voice in the back of your head saying, but the reality is I realize it's not really imposter syndrome. What's happening is people are actually telling us we don't belong, right? And they're doing things to what I've experienced throughout my career is that when I succeed or get into a position of influence or power, people will start beating you up and stabbing you in the back. And so it's not imposter syndrome. It's actually people trying to undermine you. And once I realized that, then I could have a different perspective on it and say, okay, I mean, in general, it's easy to say it's imposter syndrome, but we also have to understand that there are people actively engaging in trying to undermine us. So, it makes a big difference. It's like, no, I'm not an imposter. I belong here. In fact, I worked harder to get here probably than most everybody else, especially white men who are in these positions. So, and I want to come back to I start with that one chapter with that African proverb, which is you have to work twice as hard to get half as far as a white person, basically, especially a white male. And so, here we are working so hard to get into these positions. And then we want to say we have imposter syndrome. Well, no, it's not imposter syndrome. It's like you have to be way up here. And, there's the book by Ijeoma Oluo about mediocre white men. I mean, think about how easy it is for these people to get into these positions and get paid better and all this. And we have to work so hard. So anyway, that's my take on imposter syndrome.
Got you. Thanks for sharing that. So Kareem, and sticking in that concept, and I know you deal with a lot of different students from different backgrounds and things of that nature. Can you explain some of the things that some of your students will exhibit when they feel like they don't belong? Like when they feel like, this is not the space for me.
When they don't belong, I mean, we can start and discuss, some of the topics that we've had with schools when we're talking about advanced placement and getting students into that particular realm, only to be discouraged by the people that say that they shouldn't be there, which is the teachers. Like we have someone that is gifted. We know that they have the ability to succeed. Only, like the professor said, to be cut down by the adults who start telling them, you really don't belong here. Hey, Mr. Spence, they're not performing well. Never mind the fact that they were going through a pandemic. They really don't belong because they're not meeting the meeting up to the contract, I should say. And I don't want to say too much, but you know what I'm talking about. To advanced placement. So in essence, we make those that we don't truly understand have to, like Professor said, work twice as hard to get into positions, only for when they get there, start to discourage, emotionally and psychologically. to when they start to really believe that maybe I don't belong here.
Mhm.
That's a tough path. And once that's done, it's undone. It's easier just to punch somebody in the face than it is to like have them go through that emotional abuse.
Right, right. I want to go back to advanced placement because I think a lot of people don't understand that it's not standardized, right? So each school can make a determination of who they let into these advanced placement things. So it becomes
Yes.
a moving target. Every year, the criteria changes. Oh, you need
Mhm.
teacher recommendations, or you need this grade point average. Every year it completely changes so that their numbers can fit right the way that
Mhm.
they want it. And so it becomes a moving target when we talk about advanced placement. The simple fact that the information is not necessarily readily available to a lot of the parents is in itself a problem. Because I know growing up when I was in school, like I had no idea I didn't know what advanced placement was until I was in college, and I graduated with a 4.0. Like, like why wasn't I in advanced
I'm
class?
I'm s- I'm still waiting for somebody to explain to me what gifts and talent it is. I have no idea what it is now. I know what it is in other states when they're having their kids prep for the SSAT so they can get into some like prestigious summer programs and even some prestigious high school. I have no idea what GT is.
It's
They give
interesting.
me no idea. Nobody can explain to me. Even
There's
the GT
actually
teachers can't explain to me.
there's actually a bunch of studies out right now that are talking about that when kids are in these gifted and talented programs, you're not really seeing that much growth in it. Like their reading levels are relatively the same. Their test scores are relatively the same. There's not a lot of growth in there. So they're asking about what the validity of these programs actually are, other than the label, because these kids will perform the same in your quote unquote general classes as well. So there's a lot of research that's going on about
And
that.
if you don't mind me jumping in, as somebody who sees this at the college level, plus I work with organizations that work with kids who are kind of college bound and so on. I mean, these AP classes have become a total scam. I'm sorry, but it's just, and I keep telling my son, he's going into a senior year, I don't really want you to don't take AP, but he's putting it on himself. He wants to take the, I'm just like, don't take AP classes. And he's like, no, I have to. And the reason I do that is because it's I took, I was in a school where they did push me to take AP classes. My parents wouldn't have known, but the reality is that these classes are just, they're just designed to help you take a test, right? It's like every other thing. They're geared towards helping you take a test. And it's not geared towards, my son, when he was my older son who's in college now, he took this AP class, and I said, this guy's not a professor of college professor. He's making you guys do stuff that I would never ask you to do in a college course. And your writing is better than some of my college students. And he's giving you C's and D's on it, anyway, so I am not a fan of AP courses. I think you're absolutely right that they're totally arbitrary in terms of what's taught, in terms of they should not be used for college credit because I can't say because because there's no standardization. I mean, theoretically there is. I mean, they all take the same test, but I mean, the stuff, anyway, I could go on and on. But I just get really annoyed with the whole AP thing.
Like we hit a nerve. I'm right here.
Yeah. At least so I'll say this, right? If we had the same energy poured towards some of our kids that are lower performing and made them start to believe that they were advanced kids, I guarantee you they will start to believe that they were advanced kids and start coming to school and acting like it.
And that's the whole thing about the imposter syndrome, right? You're brought it right back to the original point, which is that, seriously, if we treat there's new research by this neuroscientist at Stanford that says if basically everybody has the same capacity. The difference is how we challenge them, what we give them, how we help them to grow. And I lived in Austin, Texas for 12 years. Sorry, you've hit a nerve. So I have to talk.
That's what I do. I do stuff like that.
But so my son, when he was supposed to go to middle school, the school he was supposed to go to for our neighborhood school was a magnet school. And there was no way he was going to get into the magnet because every kid in the entire Austin in, unified school district applied to that magnet school. So I said, fine. But the other part of the school, it was very divided and segregated between the kids who were in the magnet and the kids who weren't. And it's like, I'm not going to put my son through that. So we sent him to a private school. But I was like, if it's good enough for the magnet kids, why isn't it good enough for every single kid? Why are we pouring resources and, better teachers and everything into the magnet and not giving every kid that friggin' opportunity? So that's what really got me upset. And I just couldn't believe that we had created this incredibly segregated thing. Anyway, I could go on now, but
Maybe I want you to jump in from the special education perspective, because I think a lot of the general, I guess, perspective is that, their education is a little bit different. Like, can you break that down in terms of how you go about teaching your special education students and the expectations that you have of them, and I'll let you explain. I know the answer, but our audience may not know the answer. So can you touch on that a little bit?
Let's go back to the gifted and talented program. And I also feel some kind of way about it because my children were in the gifted and talented program in a small school district. And then when we moved into a larger school district last school year, we're not given the opportunity to even test to enter that GT program. So I'm not sure what happened from one district to another. Maybe they lost their wisdom somewhere in the move, but they were not eligible for the GT program. So I'm not quite sure how they figured that out. But in the special ed classroom, I feel like a lot of times teachers that aren't familiar with the special ed world think that we take their work and kind of water it down to be nothing at all. But in reality, I show some teachers what my children's work looks like, and their work is honestly a lot of times even more than what the expectations are in the gen ed classroom, because I have the time to sit with you, to work with you, to show you examples, and my bar is this high. So if you come into my classroom and you're working right here, I'm not coming down there. We're gonna fight back and forth until you come up to where I'm at, because I have the time and the energy to make sure that you get there. So I feel like a lot of times I want gen ed teachers to come into my classroom so that they can really see what kind of work is taking place there.
It's interesting. Really good point. So all you educators out there, you should constantly be visiting classrooms and getting ideas and working with your colleagues. Me as an administrator, I'm always talking to other administrators and picking their brains. So you should definitely, I believe you should, as an educator, you should be a lifelong learner. If you're not reading something or if you're not exploring, then what are you in this profession for at the end of the day? You're doing these kids a disservice. I want to wrap this part of the podcast up, and Ms. Gibbons, if you can give our educators some advice who may be struggling with relating to students from a different culture, and how do we go about the process of bridging that gap from an educator standpoint?
Well, if there's one thing I could get educators to do is to understand where they're coming from. And we all need to do that, right? Because I'm coming from a place of, maybe more privileged than others, so it's not necessarily just about race. It's understanding that I may make assumptions about my students, even in the college classroom, that I make because I'm coming from a certain place and a certain understanding. And so what I try to do, and I advise teachers in general to do, is to take a step back, take a look at your own internal biases, that have to do with, it may be because you were raised, in a more privileged environment, and maybe you had a better, my education is different from the education that my students have had. And so we need to really try to understand ourselves so that we can better understand our students, and how we are using our own frameworks to understand them, and instead try to understand from their perspective and get that connection going in a way that allows us to see them. We need to see our students, right? And not see them through this lens that we have created of the world. So that's my biggest piece of advice.
Kareem, you got any questions? I know you probably got 1,000 things going in your head as usual.
I mean, we've had like so many guests that it's becoming like a continuous conversation that educators really should change their perspective on how they see students. And not just like, these are kids. Like they haven't even grown, even been able to learn the world. They don't even have a driver's license, but we're making predictions of what their outcome is going to be in 10 to 15 years. Yeah, he ain't going to be nothing. Look at it. Look how he dressed. Like, how can you say this is somebody's kid? So when we talk about empathy, how about this like starting and being able to treat someone else's child like you would want them to treat yours? Because a lot of times when yours is treated the same way, you get upset, you get angry. So yes, I think you guys have hit a nerve with me because I've seen so many young people become mistreated by those that consider themselves educated. And what are you actually educating them? To be like you? To have biases like you? To see the world with blinders on? Not even to consider someone else's feelings or what they may be going through? Or how about this? The challenges that you have in life, so do young people. They come from worlds that you wouldn't even begin to understand, but yet they still show up every day looking to get ahead, looking to change their world perspective. And what do? We treat them just like the world does,
Hmm.
which is wrong.
Hmm. Jamie, you have anything to add before we switch gears?
So I feel like we have to remember why we come to school every day. And it's not to be friends with all of the teachers in the building, but it's to advocate for the students that are there. So you can't be afraid to unfriend or not be friends with or lose friends in the process if that means sticking up and standing up for students in your building that need you to be there. Because we have to remember that when these children come to school, some of them don't have a mom or a dad or someone with a voice at home that's well spoken enough to speak out for them when they see something wrong. So you can't be afraid to step up and do that. And even if that means, not this person not liking you or that person not liking you or this person talking about you, go ahead and talk. But at the end of the day, I'm not here for you. I'm here for the students. And I think that that's the most important thing to remember.
Good point. Excellent. So we're going to switch gears a little bit. I'm going to throw a curveball at Jamie and Kareem because they definitely were not prepared for this. I just thought about doing this right now because that's the way that I do. Look, on previous podcasts, I did a this or that. So I'm going to give everybody a this or that. And just give us, I'm going to give you one as well. And you have to pick one. You got to tell me why you picked that one thing. All right. So I am going to actually I'll start with Kareem.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to go light on you early. I'm going to do music. I'm going to say Jay-Z or Nas.
Well, here's the thing. I have to go with consistency. And Nas had one really good album, classic. Put him in the GOAT debate. But Jay, I grew up with him. And I watched as he developed and as I developed. And I'm a huge fan of Hove simply because now we're talking about family issues. And for me, I can go back to Reasonable Doubt and that mindset, but also can I connect with him with the 444? And there are certain songs that even today, like you just need to have. Like he's so diverse in his music and even the other artists that he worked with. Nas, why he's like really good as a lyricist, and I'm not taking anything away from him, but at the same time, Hove is who he is. Like
Nas just won the Grammy though.
Yeah, Jay got like 6 of them.
Yeah, but he just
And on top of that, so even when you talk about some of the stuff that he hasn't done as far as the movies, like I didn't know who what was the young guy on Netflix, the young male that got locked up in Rikers Island that ultimately committed suicide.
Broden. What's his last name?
I can see him.
Yes, a young man, but that was
yeah. Anyway.
And then, like just recently, when we had the movie, I think it was Black Judas and the Messiah. Like I didn't know who. What's his name? Died on the same day. Fred Hampton. I didn't know who Fred Hampton was until Jay made that verse years ago. Like who's Fred Hampton? And then I had to go back and say, oh, that's who Fred Hampton was. So even before the movie came out, I knew who Fred Hampton was.
You made
and did research on him.
You make a great point, and we talk about this in one of our presentations on how to teach today's hip hop generation. I learned about my culture through hip hop music. So I grew up during the time, Public Enemy, Karis One, and then when they started, I heard the word Malcolm X. I was like, "Who's this Malcolm X person?" Maybe go pick up the autobiography of Malcolm X, and that just kind of started everything else. So hip hop, I owe a lot to hip hop about not only who I am, but understanding who my people are.
I just found out, one second, I just found out that Marcus Garvey has a son that's alive. I didn't even know that.
News to me too. Huh. Interesting. We're going to stay with the musical category. So Jamie, you're up next. This one's going to be pick alternative music or hip hop. Which one you pick?
Hip hop first, but alternative is a definite second.
Why hip hop first?
I think that hip hop, when I listen to alternative music, it takes me to a different space. So I have to be in a mood to listen to alternative music. And if I just turn it on, it might take me to that space and I might not want to be there. Or hip hop.
That's that sunken place. You go to the sunken place.
Down there. I don't always want to be down there. Sometimes I want to be up top.
Listen, if you start drinking tea and swirling a spoon in the tea, I'm leaving. I'm done. I don't know you. Miss Givens, I'm gonna say, give you Biggie or Tupac.
Oh man,
it's not gonna be easy.
Well, I have to admit, I kind of had a crush on Tupac.
Brenda's had a baby. Is that what did it for you?
Actually, it was the movie Poetic Justice.
I was thinking Juice, but go ahead.
Yeah. So,
all I remember in that movie is his nails was dirty. And
what was the guy who kept brushing his hair? What was his name? He just kept brushing his hair throughout the whole movie.
Oh man. All right. So we're gonna go with location. I'm gonna give you two locations. Pick one and tell me why. Miss Givens, gonna stay with you. Spokane or Austin?
Oh God. Oh man.
Yes.
Spokane or Austin. Oh my God. Austin, because Austin, my Spokane friends are going to kill me for this, but Austin actually has some culture. And, it's not, I have issues with both places, but at least in Austin, you can find jazz music and amazing food. And, there's Black, unfortunately the Black community is getting pushed out to the suburbs, but at least it's there. I mean, so even compared to here, we had a group called Black Girls Run in Austin that I loved and still am friends with, even though I'm across the country. So there was I found a really great community there that I didn't have in Spokane or even here. So.
Got you. Kareem.
Yes, sir.
DR or Jamaica?
Well, I still haven't made it to the DR, and I'm a little saddened by the fact that the pandemic came and I was on my way. I've been to Jamaica, had fun. I'm really looking forward to going down to the DR, hopefully first week or the second week of July. So I'm going to DR all day.
DR all day. All right, Jamie. New Jersey or Florida?
Florida.
Why?
The water's cleaner.
The same water. Yeah, it's the same sandwich. It's the same water.
Different. It's just different. The water is beautiful. A different environment. Everyone's laid back and everybody speaks to you in Florida. The only problem is there's dragons that run around in Florida, but besides that,
dragons.
Dragons aren't real, right? That's not a real thing.
They have long tails and they jump out of like bushes and stuff. But besides that,
it's called a lizard.
Yeah, iguanas.
It kind of looks like a dragon. It could have been an iguana, but
yeah.
Wait, were you smoking down there?
I understand it though, because you're so little and that thing may look like a dragon to you. I get it.
It's big. It's big.
I understand. All right. Well, we're going to wrap this podcast up. Ms. Givens, thank you so much for
Thank you.
taking the time to be with us to hit on this important topic. Something that we're definitely going to continue to revisit through season 7 a little bit. We got some other things coming up in season 7, some musical artists, hopefully, and some other artists that we're looking at, trying to take it a little bit different. Hopefully, we're going to get some more kids on here that want to talk to. I definitely want to explore that as well. But Ms. Gibbons, any last words to our educator audience out there, words of encouragement or anything of that nature?
Just hang in there. And I want to mention that there are some free resources related to my book. If you go to the publisher's website, just Google Bristol University Press and Terry Gibbons. And actually on my website, you can download a free reading guide. And I'm always happy to talk to folks like you. You guys, this has been a great discussion. And thanks so much for having me.
And what's that website that people can get in contact?
So terrygivens.com, TerryGivens.com.
Awesome. We're definitely going to put that at the bottom of the screen. You'll be able to look that up and also take a look at the book. I'm about halfway finished. It's definitely worth reading. Some very interesting and insightful information within that book. Kareem, any last words before we get out of here?
No, I just want to thank Professor Givens for her time and also her willingness to go and reach out and continue to have this conversation, because I don't think there's enough conversation that's happening in the realm of empathy, or even in the realm of being able to be comfortable in your own skin. And that imposter mode is big, because we have so many people that don't feel comfortable in their own skin. So I just want to thank her for her time.
Awesome. Jamie, any last words?
Also, thank Mrs. Gibbons. As an educator, it's hard for us to find a starting point. So anytime someone offers us information and gives us, what we can use to bring into the classroom and have that beginning conversation is helpful. So thank you.
Awesome. As far as my concern, a huge part of being an educator is having the ability to problem solve. I don't care what that problem looks like. You're going to be faced with a lot of different scenarios where you have to solve problems. And this conversation about race and culture in the classroom, it is a problem that needs to be solved, and we need to be able to address it. We need to have the courage to be able to address it. But that's going to take you as educators to go out there and do some research and get some more information. And in terms of trying to at least understand in a broader context what's going on, not only within your classroom, but what's also going on across the globe as well. So continue to do that journey, continue to learn. Because you're going to grow as a human being, and once you start to understand a little bit more, you'll be able to relate and be able to help kids solve problems. I mean, that's our job, is to be able to help them and guide them to solve those problems. So don't be afraid to have these difficult conversations. I know there's school districts out there that kind of ignoring it and hoping it'll go away, but we have to have this conversation. We have to have these conversations with these children so that we can, at the very least, help them to navigate their feelings through this time of growth that they're going through. Just some housekeeping things before we get out of here. We are offering free, I said it, free 3-part seminar for all you aspiring assistant principals and newly hired assistant principals. I am giving you 3 workshops for free, 1 hour. You have an opportunity to listen each session about what life is like as an assistant principal, the stuff that your educational programs in college did not tell you, because they told me a whole lot of theory, but they didn't tell me a whole lot of practice of what my day was going to be like every single day working with those kids. So that's going to be part 1. Part 2, we're going to talk about interview techniques and how you can land that job as an assistant principal. And in part 3, we're going to come back with connecting the dots on how you can use customer service in the educational setting to help build relationships. So these are completely free. Just check out our website. All you do is log in. The first one is May 20th. Our second one is going to be June 3rd, and then we're going to wrap it up at June 10th. Then we're probably going to flip it before the school year starts in September again. So I'm giving you some free gems out there, things that I've been talking to a lot of educators about. So make sure you check that out. We also got a good friend of the room, Miss Dr. Darlene Dahan, is giving out also a free webinar on how to reach ELL students and problem solving. So make sure you check her out. That's coming soon. That deadline's coming soon. So by the time this podcast come out, you probably will have 1 or 2 days to log in. I'll put that link up there as well. But like always said, we always surround ourselves with some powerful people that are doing great things, and these are people that are just out there doing it for the love of the industry and the kindness of their heart, and because they have knowledge. Each one teach one. So make sure you check that out. But until next time, as always, staying proud.